Welcome to Dark Facade, a channel dedicated to looking past the veneer of humanity and finding its true face. I will be your tour guide down this winding path of tales, ranging from the supernatural, science fiction, and twisted love. All the stories you're about to hear are assorted bits of literature that will range from the bizarre to the unexpected. So sit back, lower the lights, and allow yourself to be taken away from everyday reality to its shadowy reflection. If you enjoy our unusual content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to receive more. Thank you. Edie, Part 1. Christopher Harris was what many would call a born skeptic. From the time he was able to speak, the world held little to no magic for him. Childhood fancies such as Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and their pretty companion, the Tooth Fairy, were already myth well before he lost his first tooth. Perhaps this lack of belief could be blamed on the fact that he was an extraordinarily bright person. His scholastic career read like the who's who among intellectual giants. He graduated from Stanford University with a degree in neuroscience by the time he was 20, and had his doctorate from Oxford soon after. Yes, for Professor Harris, the world, though fascinating, was a very explainable place. He believed this so much that he had written book after book proclaiming it to be true. His strong sense of reason is why he was driving now on I-44 highway to the tiny town of Highlandville, Missouri. A challenge had been issued to him by a Ms. Jane Powell, the new curator of the famous Marshall Occult Museum. Emma Marshall, by whom the museum had been started and was named after, had been famous for her dealings in the supernatural when she was alive. Over the years she had collected quite a few cursed and possessed artifacts, one of which was a child's toy named Edie. The doll's dark history was legendary in certain circles, and Professor Harris had been openly vocal about his cynicism regarding her life's work and denouncing her as a fraud. The sun was all but gone before he heard the GPS announce that he had reached his destination. He turned slowly onto the blacktop driveway that would take him straight up to the front door. Marshall Occult Museum was illuminated for a brief moment in his headlights before he pulled in to park. The mid-August night wrapped its stifling arms around him as he exited the air-conditioned car for the humid outdoors. He had heard tales about the suffocating summer heat of the Midwest, but the stories fell short of the actual experience. He was already beginning to sweat, and he hadn't moved a muscle. The sound of the cicadas was dying down, giving way to crickets and other nocturnal insects. His brief reverie was interrupted by Casey Bellows, one of the reporters who'd shown up to document the whole event. "Good evening, Professor. It's good to see you again," he grinned pleasantly. "Hello, Casey. Likewise." "This is some kind of heat, huh?" Bellows said, attempting to keep up the pleasantries as they strolled towards the front door. "Yes, I have to admit it makes me appreciate the New England summers I'm used to," he replied. As they reached the front doors, Bellows paused for a moment. "It isn't quite a circus in there, Chris. There are only a handful of other reporters, but I've already met Miss Powell, and, well, she's a little different." "Yes, I imagine she is," he replied with a slight laugh. "Okay, Doc, you've been warned," Bellows told him before going inside. The hot night's effects dissipated in the coolness of the front lobby after the door shut behind them. There were several other reporters scattered about from various parts of the country and state. All of them had come for the same reason, to document the event that was about to happen. Professor Harris looked up in time to see a slender, dark-haired woman enter the room. Her chestnut tresses were tied up neatly in a bun, and she was dressed most unseasonably in a long-sleeved black dress. Miss Powell, hello again. I'd like you to meet—" "Thank you, Mr. Bellows, but I know who this man is. Dr. Harris, your reputation precedes you," she said abruptly. "Indeed, Miss Powell, as does yours," he answered coolly. Her eyes narrowed slightly before she managed to paint a faint smile across her lips. "I assume that since you are here, you're serious about accepting my challenge," she said. "Oh, quite serious," he nodded. "Very well. If everyone will follow me, please, and remember, do not touch anything inside the room," she announced, then picked up a large ring of keys. The small group followed her down a dimly lit hallway where she paused at the first door. "Before we continue, Professor, I need to know for certain you're familiar with Edie's history," Miss Powell said. "Okay, fair enough. How about I start from the beginning?" "Everyone get ready," he said with a Cheshire cat grin. The subtle din of chuckles gave Harris the go-ahead he was looking for. Edie's story began in 1961. She belonged to a little girl by the name of Adele, whose family nicknamed her Edie. Her father was a local black minister in Highlandville and also an avid supporter and spokesman for civil rights. To make a predictable story short, the KKK showed up for a rally outside of his church, and as a result of the havoc and destruction they caused, the little girl was killed. She was found near the charred remains of the church, still clutching her doll. "How am I doing so far?" "So far, so good," Bellows laughed. "Go on," Miss Powell said, as she led everyone through the second door. Shortly after the girl's burial, her mother began treating the doll as if it were her child, cuddling it, talking to it, even trying to feed it. She claimed that her daughter's spirit had taken refuge within the doll, and that she would dry the community's tears with blood. An uneasy silence seemed to take hold of the entire group as the tale began to turn the corner from tragedy to darkness. Edie's grandmother, along with other members of the community, dismissed her daughter's strange behavior as grief until the night of August 4th, 1962. The very men responsible for the KKK outbreak that had ended Edie's life were found lynched outside of the old burnt remains of the church. Of course, this led to the arrest and conviction of Edie's mother, father, and brothers. When she was questioned about the deaths of the men, her mother simply replied, "Edie did it." Predictably, her father, brother, and mother were all lynched by the town before the decision of the courts could be made. Afterward, the doll was found at her mother's feet. "This was indeed a shameful part of this town's history," Bellows murmured. "Shameful, yes, but there's more to this tale, isn't there, Professor?" Miss Powell stated. "Yes, the ghost story is not quite finished. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Edie had one final score to settle. All those involved in the deaths of her parents and siblings ended up dead as well. Seems the town of Highlandville was becoming a most unhospitable place if one didn't want to be hanged." The professor's sarcasm elicited another chuckle from the gathering. A stern look from his hostess brought him back to the story. In the end, Edie's grandmother realized that whatever had taken residence within the doll was not her granddaughter. She decided it had to be destroyed. It is presumed she tried to burn it in the fireplace because the next morning that's where the doll was found, intact and unharmed, among the still hot ashes. The grandmother, however, was not so lucky, as she was found dead in a nearby chair. Since then, anyone who has possessed the doll has met similar dark experiences. Which is why, my friends, this little terror has been locked safely away here, Professor Harris concluded with a know-it-all grin. Jane Powell met him with an arched brow before opening the third door and leading them down a spiral metal staircase. It opened out into the Holy of Holies, as one reporter called it later, of dark artifacts collected from the cases around the county that Emma Marcia had participated in. As agreed by all who came along for the joyride, no one touched anything. The group stopped short in front of what appeared to be a tiny metal coffin. Ms. Powell put on gloves before opening the top to reveal a rather unremarkable handmade rag doll. Her drawn-on face was almost faded to nothing, and her black yarn hair was loosely held in pigtails by a thin red ribbon that matched her dress. "Well, Professor Harris, meet Edie," Jane said. He looked down at the unimpressive antiquity of darkness with an unmasked look of disappointment. "You expected devil horns and a tail?" Miss Powell mused. "Something like that," he admitted. "Well, it is my hope and prayer that she keeps you disappointed," his hostess replied before carefully picking her up and handing her over. "This is one prayer, Miss Powell, I truly believe will be answered," he replied as he posed beside her for the cameras while cradling the doll in one hand. Before he left that evening, Jane Powell gave him one last thing. "What's this?" he asked, when she placed a journal in his hands. "Written accounts about Edie you may find useful," she answered. "You never mentioned this before," he said. "Edie's not been allowed outside of the museum until now. In any case, why give it to me?" he asked, a little curious to her motives. "Let's just hope you won't need it," she replied. Harris laughed slightly before bidding her a good night and promising to return Edie in the same shape she had been given.